Hello, hello again this week. My name is Emily Eldridge with Change Light, Inner Work for Greater Good. I'm so happy to see you. I hope you are doing well. And if you are new to my channel, to this show, I would love for you to watch this episode, but also check out a lot of the other episodes. I've got lots of amazing things in there that'll really help you accelerate your ability to do the inner work that you need to do to make an even bigger difference in the world, to feel better so you can do better, as I often say. So today's topic is how is it that a weakness is actually a power? This topic came up because this past week I've been doing sessions, partly for this new project that I have. And anyway, I was doing a session, one of those sessions for this project. And this happens all the time where someone has something that they're struggling with, a part of them that's been bothering them or that's been at the root of a constant pattern or struggle in their lives. And when we actually identify what's at the core, they end up expressing things like, God, I really hate this part of me, or, oh, I wish this part of me would go away, or, this is a real weakness of mine, or, I've done so much work and I can't seem to get rid of it. Or, all kinds of expressions of, that this is a bad part of me, or this is a weakness that I have, or, a tendency to react a certain way, or a tendency to feel a certain way, or, a trigger or what have you. But the point is that it happens a lot, and especially when it comes to the inner children. When we talk about weakness and in terms of what feels weak, the inner child can tend to feel like it's a weakness that we have, usually because the emotions that an inner child feels and expresses are like sadness or vulnerability or fear or hiding or, all these other emotions and feelings that don't feel strong. So by contrast, if you're familiar with my work and the other parts that I talk about, a defender, by contrast, feels very powerful and very strong and very, and it's protective. And a lot of times it shows up with anger and it shows up with superiority. So, and that's partly because that's part of its job. It's one of its jobs, is to make us feel powerful or feel strong so that we won't feel weak or inferior, you see? So defenders can tend to, depending on who we are and the environment in which we grew up in, and a lot of times the culture and the society in which we grew up in, a defender can sometimes, not feel as intimidating. I mean, as vulnerable or scary, or, it can feel like it actually makes us feel stronger, which I have thoughts on that. But in this case, we're talking about parts of us that make us feel like we're weak, or that feel like a weakness and we have to hide it or suppress it. Or we're embarrassed of it, or we're ashamed. So this happens a lot, like I said, with inner children, which are typically wounded in the three types that I talk about. So what happens is we end up suppressing those parts. We end up shaming ourselves for feeling that way. We end up struggling with that part. We end up hiding it. We think that it's not okay to show, or we're embarrassed or humiliated. And so basically that is basically what came up in this session that I did for this project this past week. And this is classic, though, where that's how the person reacts to this part of them. And even the word that she used that came up with this part was shame. I feel so much shame. And she also felt even ashamed of having this part of her, because this isn't who I am. She's this very strong, she's got a lot of moxie. And yet she had this part of her that was basically hiding behind the skirts, if you will, kind of like a little kid who's scared and hiding. And so the point is, it was kind of tough for her to really allow herself to feel that, because that's not how she wants to feel. And that's not how she, the identity that she has about herself. But the reality is she had this little girl inside of her. I won't go into too much more detail than that, other than to say, just tune into yourself and notice. And you probably, if you already do like inner child work, you probably are aware of those children inside of you, or those parts inside of you that feel weak. But as always, and this is one of the things that I actually really love about the work that I do, is the moment when the person realizes that, wait a minute, this isn't a weakness. This is actually a power that I have. Or realizes that, wait a minute, I thought this thing was stupid or wrong, or it didn't know what it was talking about. And wait a minute, it's actually got a lot of wisdom. wait a minute, it's actually telling me some really incredible things, and like really wise things start pouring out of the person's mouth. It's so much fun when that happens, because it's such a complete mind shift for the person to realize that what they thought was a weakness that they had, or something shameful or embarrassing that they had inside of them, or that was causing them to behave in ways or feel ways that they felt were embarrassing or shameful, is actually a part that's a power that's incredibly powerful, and powerful in a great way. Here's the thing. So the point is that it's that moment of shifting that I love. But here's the thing. And so let me just put it this way. My point is that how is it that what we perceive to be weaknesses are actually powers? Well, for one thing, a lot of the reason why we have a misperception of these parts of us is because the reality is they are parts of our power. The way I often describe it is that we are pure power, and that every part of us is a part of our power. But here's the difference. If it's acting in a way that's not serving our highest good, or that's causing us to repeat patterns that aren't healthy, or that don't feel helpful for, whatever it is, whatever kind of presence we want to be. So for example, if it's that part of us that's like, just suddenly will rage or feel really angry and reactive, even in situations where it's not being threatened, like that's where that's not helpful, right? Or it's not necessarily healthy. It might cause us to behave in ways and treat people in ways that are not okay, and that are, maybe even border on abusive. The point is, when we have these parts of us, they are distortions of whatever their true power is. So they're basically parts of our power that have been distorted by fear or by pain, or both. But what happens is, and I talk about this a lot, you've heard me talk about this before, is that as we go through life, let's say you start off as this beautiful, perfect little child, pure power, pure joy, pure light. But as that child, or as that child go through life, you have experiences that cause those parts to carry the wounds of those experiences that might have felt hurtful, or even the beliefs that might have come out of that experience, maybe even their misperceptions of the reality of what actually happened, or they're really genuinely accurate perceptions of what actually happened. But they're carrying the beliefs, they're carrying the emotions that arose, or that they absorbed from that experience, or that they felt they needed to have in order to protect you. They're carrying some of the behaviors that cause us to behave in ways that maybe we saw others behave, and we end up treating ourselves and or other people that way. But the point is that, so they get distorted, and we end up with multiple of these parts, sometimes many, many, many. For some people, it might have not a whole ton, but the ones that are there are really, really big. Or I would say, like me, like I got super fragmented from like so many experiences in my life. And so what happens is those powers, what was that pure, bright, loving, just essence, power essence, gets distorted, and it ends up overreacting, or over energized, or maybe even under energized, or it ends up taking control when it shouldn't be taking control, or it ends up becoming suppressed. We feel like maybe that power showed itself in an experience in our lives, a moment in our lives, and somebody reacted against it. So we ended up unconsciously suppressing it. And so what happens is that power ends up reacting against that force that was put upon it. The point, though, is that part of us got distorted, got impacted by some kind of fear or pain, or something that made it feel unsafe. So it ends up acting and feeling and behaving in certain ways that we go, oh, I wish I didn't feel that way. And oh, I'm so humiliated by this part of me. Or God, I wish I could get over that. Or why do I react that way? Why do I get angry? Why am I so controlling? And so we can end up seeing those parts that act up, or parts that feel like they control us, or parts that we feel like we're struggling with. We perceive them as weaknesses. We perceive them as flaws. We perceive them as something wrong with us. We perceive them as some kind of we're effed up in some way. We perceive them as bad. But their core essence, their true essence, every part of us, these parts of us, they are not bad. I have never met a part of a person that turns out to be actually at its core bad. It may be behaving badly because it's trying to get your attention, or it's trying to protect you. It doesn't want you to get hurt like you did before, or it's trying to control situations because it's afraid of you being out of control. There are parts of us that can behave badly and feel bad and cause us to react badly to things, quote unquote. But their core essence is always good. And it's always power. And their intentions for us are always good, or for itself. They're always good. And so the thing is, we end up having this misperception. But as I work with these parts, doing my drawing out process and fully and permanently transform these parts back to their true essence, that's when you get this amazing joy and light and freedom and wisdom and power and strength that comes out of these parts that you may have never even known were there. So that part, let's say that defender part that's really angry and gets really rageful, or that trying to get you to be angry and set your boundaries, or that causes you to react in ways or feel certain, you're like, why am I getting angry? Everything seems okay, but it could be perceiving things that you're not perceiving. It could be trying to get you to set a boundary when you're not setting an appropriate boundary. And so that's the fun thing, is that when that part transforms, all this like wisdom and power come out. And so what ended up happening, as it almost always happens, well, I'll say as happens when it comes to inner children, because inner children can transform back to different, the woundeds can transform back to different types of inner children often. But as happened again in that session that I was referring to at the beginning of this episode, is that part turned out to have a ton of wisdom for her, a ton of awesomeness. And she became, I don't want to give it away too much, because the project is something that you might hear later, but ended up having, like, started off as being like scared and all this, and ended up being like so like sassy and awesome. So it turned into like, oh, well, this is actually a part of this woman that had a lot of power and a lot of sass and a lot of smarts and a lot of wisdom and a lot of very observant, was very observant of this woman's childhood, and saw things that even as a child she constantly didn't see, but this part of her did. And so that's where what she thought was a weakness was actually a power inside of her, that now that it's been brought back to its true essence, now that it's been freed of its fear and its pain and brought back into its true power and joy and freedom, now it's a power, and now she sees what a power it is. So that's the difference. It's a misperception. So here I am. I'm not sitting here saying, oh, that part of you that throws a temper tantrum, well, temper tantrums are a power of yours. No, obviously I'm not saying that. Or like, blaming other people for things, it's not saying that those unhelpful or unhealthy behaviors are a power. It's saying that the essence of that part of you absolutely is power and has wisdom and has all kinds of other amazing things that are parts of you, that ultimately are they're just parts of your power that are temporarily distorted by an experience, whether an immediate experience, like a quick one, or a chronic experience in your life. Excuse me. I feel like there's one thing just one other thing I wanted to add, but I'm kind of burping. I apologize. I had soup right before this, vegetable soup. But that is, let me just think for a second. Isn't that funny? If you see my other episodes, you know that I'm rarely at a loss for words. Oh, here's something else I want to add, because here's where people can get mistaken and confused about what the true power is. And I'll give you an example. For example, victim mentality. For example, and so victim mentality, let's just say, let's say that someone has a very strong victim mentality and that they think that the world's out to get them, and or they like really identify with the fact that they were a victim, but they use that victim story or victimization against other people, or use it to argue against their own power, argue in favor of their own woundedness, and use and hold that over people. So just using this as an example of where that would be an example of where, in my opinion, that the distorted part is then it's then used to try to gain some kind of power from that. Something that happens a lot, for example, I study a lot about like narcissism. And one of the ways that a narcissist, for example, can control others, especially a covert narcissist, can try to control others is through their victim stance, their victim mentality. And if you're familiar with the drama triangle also, with the persecutor, rescuer, and victim on the drama triangle, if you know that or study that, you know that, believe it or not, there's a persecutor, the rescuer, and the victim, and who's the most powerful position on that triangle? It's the victim. I'm just sharing random thoughts with you, but it's that victim stance, because they're not responsible for anything. That's the attitude. Someone who's in that victim position, they're not responsible for anything, and everybody else is persecuting them, and nobody's really helping them. It's all this kind of stuff. But my point being that sometimes people, and you may have done this, and I think I've probably done this in some ways, people can derive a sense of identity and power from, for example, being in that victim position, or even being in the rescuer position, or even being in the persecutor position. And this is where those X powers, you know, we've got the woundeds, the defenders, the controllers. This is where we can be so identified with them, or so not realize, you know, that that's not us, that's a part of us, that we end up thinking that those are parts of our power. So we can start to think that our rage is like, that's my power. We can start to think that like controlling things is power, and or trying to control everything is a kind of power. My point is this, that this is where it's a little bit of a tricky thing, in that we can get confused and think that actually the X powers are power. But really, the X powers are just distortions of that power. And when you actually heal, let's say those woundeds or those other parts that are causing that victim mentality, when you actually heal that, that's when you get the true, powerful, usually peaceful and wise and strong presence that it actually is. Not the victim story, not the poor me, not the persecution complex, not all those other things that we can sometimes get confused about. So I don't know if that's helpful, but I just want to throw that in there as an extra kind of angle on this, is just to be aware of what is true power, and what is a distorted power that you're actually identifying with and thinking that it is part of your power. And that's just something to consider. All right, but ultimately, I just want you to understand that every part of you is a part of your power. And some of those parts are healed, and they are pure, and they are wise, and they're strong, and they don't react, they respond. And then there are other parts that are distorted by fear, by pain, by rage, by other things that maybe we've been influenced by or impacted by. And they're behaving and causing us to behave in ways that aren't healthy, that aren't helpful, or causing us to feel ways that aren't healthy or aren't helpful. But there is power and there is wisdom in that. And so in that case, it's a matter of uncovering the true wisdom and the true power that part is trying to express and help you express. All right, I hope this is helpful. As always, Emily Eldridge with changelight.world. Please do email me, Emily@changelight.world, and join our free course and free community at community.changelight.world. We've got good stuff, and we've got good stuff coming down for you as well that I'm working on right now. Very exciting. All right, I hope you take care, and I will talk to you later.